The great virtue of Corban for me in the long term was that he opened up the religious imagination for me.
So this is what I want to get to with this particular idea of the philosopher as, living in this imaginal so that you can live in as many different worlds as possible.
And that's the axis imaginalis. That's where Sophia connects heaven and earth.
And so this is about reception, isn't it? It's about saying yes to the visitation of the divine presence.
Sometimes the very most important things are incredibly small and subtle, so people should pay attention.
Oh, dear Diana, tell me why do the things that are beautiful always have a darker side? Oh, dear Diana, tell me why is the good never good enough? Underneath the dirt and scar is an old and familiar face.
All right, welcome back to the ladder, Journeys in Platonic Mysticism. Today I have the illustrious Tom Cheetham with me, as well, of course, Gareth and Rob. And we are here to talk about your work on Henri Corbin, the Imaginal, James Hillman. Tom Cheetham is the author of many important books, especially if you're on this path of mysticism or shamanism. And I would like to let you know there's Imaginal Love, The Meaning of Imagination, and Henri Corbin and James Hillman, Green Man, Earth Angel, The Prophetic Tradition, and the Battle for the Soul of the World, The World Turned Inside Out, Henri Corbin and the Angel Out Ahead, and finally, I think for me, All the World an Icon, Henri Corbin and the Angelic Function of Being. This is your latest book, and one in which you're teaching. It's not your latest book?
No, but it doesn't matter.
It's the one I thought was the latest, which now that's a fact of the world. In any case, and you're currently teaching a course on it online. For those of you who are interested in taking courses, you just need to type in tomcheetham.com, I believe, right?
That will get you there, yeah.
And you can find all the amazing resources that Tom is providing our culture right now. But I've just learned of a book I did not know about called After Prophecy. So, Tom, would you tell us about this missing book in your oeuvre?
Well, it's only missing because I don't know why it's missing, because nobody talks about it, but where? I don't know, I have a copy of it here somewhere. Is this it? This was book, yeah. No, that's the wrong one. I don't know, it's around here somewhere. It doesn't matter, but there are 5 books, and I've been recently using them in classes as texts for my classes for the first time. I've never done that before. And the last one actually was Imaginal Love, and I think that was published like almost 20 years ago, so it's been a long time, and it's very interesting. And um, I guess it was important for me to wait that long to use my own books as texts, because it took a couple decades, and all of you, people who write books will, I think, understand this. It wasn't really me who wrote the books. It was either somebody out ahead of me, which is possible, but it was me anticipating and trying to move into places that I wanted to go. And I mean, and so I'm not claiming that I was channeling anything, because it didn't feel that way. It was hard work to write them, but there was a tremendous amount of me feeling that, well, I really shouldn't talk about those books, because I don't really understand what's in them. and I think it genuinely took a couple of decades to sort of catch up with where I was trying to go. And now I feel, rightly or wrongly, that I kind of have caught up with them. Anyway, so there's 5 of them. And I I said this just before we went on. Since I'm looking at them for the first time since they were published, they're pretty good. And I'm constantly surprised by what's in them. And the third one was After Prophecy, and it is still in print, even though Rob says it's currently out of stock on Amazon. Because one of Hillman's good friends, Klaus Ottman, runs Spring Publications now, and he's been keeping the ones that have gone out of print in print, which is really sweet. And so I'll tell you that After Prophecy is really good. We did a class on it just a few weeks ago, and I was pretty stunned by what was in it. It's a nice book, well written by somebody that isn't me. You know, it's very weird.
Well, what is the thesis of After Prophecy?
Oh no! Oh God! Don't ask things like that. I mean, none of them had. None of. No, no, no. I mean, yeah, this happened 30 years ago. Somebody said, "Oh, tell us what's in your book," and he went through each of them, and I just had to make stuff
Right.
up. No, no. I mean, because. Um, so the very okay. Since we're doing this, the very first book was "The World Turned Inside Out." Which is now in a second edition, which is lovely. And that was written when we first moved to Maine, and it started out as a little essay because I'd been reading Corban and Jung and Hillman, but Corban and others for quite a few years, and I was totally confused, and because Corban's weird and difficult and hard to access for reasons that we could talk about. And so I thought, God, I got to put this into some sort of, I got to put this down on paper. So I started writing. And I thought, I'm going to write a little essay. And then when I finished my little essay, after not very long, it all came fairly fast. I thought, boy, that's kind of a long essay. And so I sent it to Hillman because because his work had influenced me so much, and he had a press. And I thought, well, I don't know, maybe he'd be interested in publishing this. And so I sent it to him, and he was very enthusiastic and said yes. So that very first book was just me trying to explain Corban to myself, really from the outside. And so it was explicitly written as an introduction in English to Henri Corbin as a whole. And then the other four came sort of on their own time, and they were all just extenuations of the questions that were generated. And that the second one was the Green Man book, and I would just write something, and then I'd write something else, and so it was like one essay, a second essay, however many are in the Green Man. And I sent them, I think I sent a copy of the manuscript to Robert Sardello because he was, connected with Hillman and all that. And he liked it. And he said, well, you could send it to SUNY Press. I think that's where I sent it. And so I thought, okay, fine. So I sent it to SUNY Press, and they said, we don't publish books of essays because I had written it as a book of essays. So I thought, okay. So I went into the table of contents and I changed it to chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and I resubmitted it, and they said, "Oh, this is fantastic." And that was the end of it, and so they were, look, so the point here is they were all written like that. I don't know what's in them. I have to go back and look and see what's in them.
I love it. Well, I know that one of the arguments that you make in that particular book is the power of language, right? And you're talking about you didn't write this, right? And that there's a kind of like the angel out ahead, like you're chasing after it. Like somehow language has this uncanny ability to recreate worlds or to create problematic worlds, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, you've spent your life thinking about the work of Henri Corbin and James Hillman, but I would assume it's not because it's the man that you revere, right? But it's the thought, it's the way of life. And what do you think people who don't know James Hillman and Henri Corbin, what do you think they should know in order to get them into this way of life
Yeah.
and the power of language?
Well, okay. Um, so I think that really one good way of hooking people is to just tell them how I got hooked. So as an undergraduate, I majored in philosophy, and that kind of thing never disappears. But then, long story, and I ended up in the sciences. And in 1990, I was doing, in a very minor way, complex systems theory in Santa Fe. So I was biology and science and computer stuff to some degree. And I walked into a bookstore in Santa Fe, and there on the shelf was a book called A Blue Fire. And I thought, oh, that's a cool name. So I took the book home. I didn't look at it for a long time. And that was Thomas More's introduction to James Hillman. And sometime after I got home from the Santa Fe trip, I opened it up. And honestly, within a couple pages, I was 38 at the time, I thought, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for all my life. And what it was he said, the imagination is the most important thing in all of reality, period. It's imagination all the way down. And I was just thrilled. And so to sort of oversimplify and make myself sound worse than I was a literalist. I was either going to be a philosopher to learn the truth, or when that didn't work out, and that's part of the story here too. When that didn't work out, I ended up in the sciences, and the sciences were the natural sciences, and I went in that direction for a number of reasons, but including the fact that I fell in love with parts of the natural world. But in both of those realms, unless you're quite careful, in a particular way, and some people are just naturally careful, you are encouraged to make the assumption that what you're doing is getting the truth. Either in natural sciences, and I love physics and mathematics and the fundamental sciences, even though I was in biology. But you have the sense that, well, you're finding out the truth about reality, and in philosophy, oh man, that's even, it's like, oh shit. And so that's bad. And here Hillman was just, no, it's all about imagination. Imagination is how you access truth. And it just blew me away. And of course, there's way more to the story, but that was the primary thing. And to finish that little bit, after I'd read Hillman almost exclusively for a couple of years, I hit upon his essay, The Thought of the Heart, and he begins it by saying, essentially, well, if you really want to know about the imagination, there's this French guy, Henri Corbin, and you should read his stuff. And so I got a copy of Creative Imagination and the Sufism of Ibn Arabi, and because Hillman's my hero, and if Hillman says this is the source, then I'm in, So I opened up Creative Imagination, and within a couple pages, I was, what the hell? What the hell? It's angels and the Quran and the Bible. What? I don't do this shit. I'm a scientist or I'm a philosopher, and we don't do the Bible and angels. This is ridiculous. And yet, there's something right, and I wasn't conscious of it, but it's right there on the first page of the Creative Imagination book. And it took me a year or two to unearth this. But first of all, there was something in Corbin's way of writing that I thought, wow, this is, I couldn't put it down. And then the thing that's actually on the first page are hints that he wasn't like a scholar of medieval religion alone. He was the first French translator of Heidegger. And when I found that out, I thought, oh no, oh, now I'm screwed. Now I got to, what the hell is going on here? And on that first page, he talks about phenomenology. And so Corban was unbelievably erudite, and he was a scholar and student of almost everything, but Western theology and philosophy. He met Heidegger. He knew Karl Barth. He read his Husserl. He wrote papers on Kierkegaard and Barth and Hamann and then when he was in his late 20s, early 30s, that's when he took the switch to Islamic mysticism and learned Arabic and Persian he's just a crazy guy. So once you land in Corban's world, you're in the great virtue of Corban for me in the long term was that he opened up the religious imagination for me in a way that Hillman couldn't do because Hillman was so allergic to spirit. and I get that. So the framing to this, I do have your original question and answer here, is that moving into Hillman and then Jung and Corban was a really long process of what Hillman calls deliteralizing. And the real central phrase for me that it took decades for me to really get past and to internalize is Hillman says, well, literalizing is a form of imagining. And I first read that and what? I always have a rock because a rock is a nice example of the literal, right? Here it is. It's a rock. It's literally real. And if I smash this screen, we're gone, And yet, being a lover of geology, there, in a funny way, there isn't any literal rock, but it takes a really, really, really long time. If you're like me and you got a lot of fundamentalism in you, which could come, in my case, came from both my parents, were very different in their literalisms. My mother's literalism was life is meaningless. My father's literalism was rocks and money and the real things in life. And both of those were truths. And what Hillman and Jung and Corbett eventually taught me was, oh, stop that. Just stop with all that. Because it's all imagination. It doesn't mean it's not real. And then here's where things get really a bit tricky. But this notion that the concrete is what's most real, man, it took me 30 years, 40 years to get past that. There's a great quote that I love from Cornelius Castoriadis, the Greek psychoanalyst and philosopher, and he says, Western philosophers always do things like, oh, let's think about what's really real. And they say, let's take this table as an example of real reality. And Castoriadis says, what if instead they'd said, let's take, Mozart's Fifth Symphony as what's really real? These things would have been really different. And that's what I got from Hillman. It was back off on this reality thing. Just back off and realize, yeah, the reality is so there's there's the short version of the long answer of why Hillman and Corban and these people are so important.
So you have mentioned a couple of times that you're a failed philosopher, but I would argue that what you're saying right now is the key characteristic of a philosopher is someone who can turn in a variety of different directions, is willing to admit ignorance even when they have a kernel of so-called truth, right? That you have to look at the rock, right? Break it open, smash it, put it back together, and see that it is both one and many. It's both there and real and not real at the exact same time, so on and so forth. And so I would, I applaud you for having entered into that particular world. And So this is what I want to get to with this particular idea of the philosopher as, living in this imaginal, so that you can live in as many different worlds as possible. So yeah, would you agree with that idea that the philosopher who's worth their grain of salt goes into the same kinds of worlds that Hillman and Corban went into, which is beyond the rational, and possessing this whirling dervish kind of mind?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a funny, yeah, I guess it's complicated. There's so many things to be said. Um, uh, let me give you another marker that was really important for me. And actually, I think it was also in 1990 when I was in Santa Fe that I happened to be reading a book by Richard Rorty. Irony, something, and contingency. There's a famous book by Richard Rorty, and I was reading that, and I think it's in there that he says, well, of course, philosophy is just a mode of, it's a genre of literature invented by Plato. Whoa, seriously? You mean it's not access to truth? It's a genre of literature, you know? And my whole imaginal world of access to certainties just sort of turned into, I don't know, butterflies and birds. And, it's like, wow. And that's, for the person that I was, that was really entrancing, okay, because it promises a kind of freedom, that was formerly blocked for me on every side from both of my parents, and a lot of this, to anyone who thinks about anything really does need to recognize that you're the one that's doing the thinking, even if you're studying Heidegger or Hegel or Deleuze. And you're attracted to those people for reasons that we call psychological. Henri Corbin would say, no, it's not psychology. It's your angel who's pointing you in these directions. And for Corban, the great moment of release, there's a great quote in the Avicenna book where he says, for some, he's talking explicitly about philosophers, and he says, there comes a time in the life of many philosophers when they suddenly realize, and I'm paraphrasing here, oh shit, that was all just me, instead of truth, you know. And in those moments, that's when you can free yourself from these rational constructions which reveal, I can almost quote it, the light of a dawn, and figures loved and longed for begin to rise. That's Corbin's style. But the feeling is reading Hillman and thinking, oh, really? Or Richard Rorty, and just all those shoulds and oughts and musts. And I had a student, one of my favorite stories of pedagogy is one of the very few times I ever taught Corban to live students in a room. We were reading Hillman, and we hit some passage in Hillman, and she just slapped her hands down on the table and said, "Oh my God, you mean you can think that?" and that's it. It's like, oh my God. Here's the thing. If you can think that, it means you can be in a new way. You can do this stuff. And let me rant for a minute, Danny, because here's a story that I tell a million times, and it's right up your alley. And I'm not sure that you have ever heard it, although it's probably in all of my books because I probably tell it all the time. But this whole thing really started for me as an undergraduate in maybe 72. I took my first course with Ed Krantz at Connecticut College, and he was a historian. And back in the 70s, he was way out ahead of the curve. Now this is kind of not so surprising. But back in the day, Ed Krantz was really ahead of the curve. And his argument was, those ancients, the Greeks and the Romans, but particularly the ancient Greeks, they didn't think or experience the world like we do. And this was when you're 18, this is a heavy lift. And he says, no, there was something funny about the ancient Greeks. They experienced themselves and the world in a different way. And his form of phenomenological hermeneutics was really weird. He would sit in front of his desk with the Greek in front of him. And I disturbed him once in his office late at night, and he was somewhere else. He looked up at me, and he was like somewhere else, and I scurried away. And some years later, he said to me, when that happens, sometimes I'm afraid I won't be able to get back. Ha ha ha. and that really weirded me out. Now the context that I have for it is that you see that look in the eyes of artists and musicians and dancers sometimes, like, oh man, if I might not be able to get back. And he had a very sophisticated theory of what happened in sometime during the generation of Anselm and Abelard. People stopped talking about what they started talking about having ideas in their heads, and the objects were out there. And so early on, I was presented with this unstable theory of knowledge. And I remember saying to him in a kind of ontological panic at the age of 20, but Dr. Krantz, what about rocks? And he just said, oh, I'm a historian. I don't know anything about rocks. But exactly those issues stayed with me my entire life. And I never let go of this example of Ed Krantz saying, no, people in different historical periods, in different cultures, they experience themselves and the world in really different ways. And just to continue for 30 seconds with Ed Krantz, he said the ancients had what he called a extensive experience of reality, whereas the moderns, after Anselm, had an intensive self. So Aristotle could say, psyche is somehow all things. And after the year 1100, more or less, nobody says that. You have ideas in your head which match the world out there, and it's been downhill ever since. I will stop.
No, I think that's beautiful. I mean, it's one of the most important. So I was going to ask you, like, because of this imaginal being able to turn in different directions and the creation of worlds or getting you to think anew, that this is why philosophy is so dangerous and why within our own culture we're seeing it slip away as a cultural value, right? That our universities and your general populace think that philosophy is elbow patch wearing white guys who have nothing to teach us because they're oppressive. And so I'm going to put a pin in that particular question just for a moment because I actually want, what was it? No, I can't remember what I was going to ask you. Oh, no. And so my point is, it will come. What was the last thing you said so that I could remember? Nature, natural. Ooh.
I wanted to talk more about Krantz. See, you're emptying my head too.
You have any idea where I'm going? I can't remember right now. Nope. All right. Well, then let me go ahead. I guess that first question wanted to come out. So yeah. Oh, here it is. Oh, there she is. the Greek world. And so that here, when you say extensive, right, that the Greek world and the
Yeah.
way that we could put ourselves back into this thinking of where they sat, in the sense of there are goddesses and there are gods and there are spirits and nymphs and imps, and the whole world is screaming of this constant relational connection, this constant communication, right? That for the Greek mind,
Hmm.
and why I think the
Hmm.
Greek world still speaks to us now is because of this ability to feel embraced by, constant presences that are offering that advice. And so that somebody like Corbin is reintroducing this back into the world, creating that world where we can think it again, right? Krantz was doing that too. And when you give your courses, you're trying, and this is what the philosopher does, is recreate this embracing world, is the way I think about it with regards to Cora in Plato's Timaeus.
Hmm.
That's the idea of the experience that the world is a kind of hugging us all of the time, and that's the power, that's the love that we have to put back into our culture, right? So I guess I'm connecting the two questions now, which is we need this. This is the kind of way that we can heal from the riff that we've created in thought and in society, whether it be dualistic religions or
Hmm.
technologies, so on and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, oh yeah, I mean, here you bump. I at least the way I think about these things, uh, I, I think you bump up against the problem that everyone who's listening to this kind of argumentation is coming from a slightly different place. And some of the people are listening and they're musicians and painters and poets, and they're okay. They'll be fine. They might really like this, and they might find it confirming, you know. But then there's everybody else. Way over here, there's the mathematicians. No, actually, they're somewhere else entirely. They're probably okay too. But there's the engineers and the literalists and the economists. No, economists. But there's, people who are fundamentalists. And we're all fundamentalists. And that's the other trick. So I guess you've got this audience of people you're trying to wake up and convince that no, actually the world's kind of cool. It's really neat. And it's full of opportunities for love and companionship, and it's shot through with beauty, and they don't buy it. They don't buy it. And for a lot of really good reasons. You can't feed the kids. I mean, there's a million reasons, right? And so each one of them has a different sweet spot. you know and so that makes the argument really, what I'm trying to get across here is that, um, I think the first, because of my own experience, I think the first yeah, among the first things that have to happen for people is they have to have something break down. Yeah. Um, in the sense, some defense has to break down, because I speak from experience. It's defenses all the way down. It's just defense, and you think, oh, now I'm free, and then, oh no, and then, oh, now I'm free, and then, oh no. It's defenses all the way down, but at a certain point, enough of them break down that you think, oh, yeah, being human is like, it's really interesting and really complicated, and wow, this is okay. And now, and you begin to get some felt sense of how to maybe move through the world in a more interesting way, you know, and but you have to break down the habits and the defenses, and everybody's has some different, and I mean, came to in class yesterday was, what works for most people is music. Just do it, man. Just go to a rave or listen to Mozart and just let that happen. And like Castoriadis says, what if the most important kind of being were like, Beethoven's Fifth pick your favorite piece of music. What if philosophers in the Western tradition have been arguing for 2,500 years that it's really all about music? They tried that, as you know, better than I do. They tried that. And people thought, no, that's just silly because music is cheesecake for the mind, but there will be something that gets to what Corban calls the thought of the heart for everyone, okay? And the argument is across cultures and across classes and across histories, the people who were closest to what Corban refers to as the thought of the heart, those are the people you want to hang out with because they're going to be able to lead you, help you find your own sweet spot. Where years ago, I read a blurb on the back of one of Leslie Scalapino's books by Ted Berrigan, maybe, but it wasn't him. It was somebody else, some other poet, who said, these poems are strange and quirky. And when I read Leslie's work, I suddenly remember, oh, that's where I wanted to be. And I thought, oh man, that nails it. It doesn't have to be Leslie Scalapine, doesn't have to be it, but whatever it is in your life that every 10 years or so, oh, that's where I wanted to be, and I forgot all about it. And Corban and Hillman, too, for that matter, their whole job is to try to get you to remember those moments. Corban would say, that's your angel calling to you, and it'd be important to pay attention.
No, I just wanted to say, Corban has this quote in Alone with the Alone where he says, let me just make sure I say it correctly. A philosopher that doesn't talk about the metaphysics of ecstasy is doing philosophy in vain. And Gareth and I were sitting in this cathedral, St. Edmundsbury Cathedral, like a week and a half ago, and they have this like 3-story organ built into this 1,000-year-old building. Every inch of the ceiling is like more intricate than like anything in Florida. And we sat there for 45 minutes and they sang this chorus, just sang. And I didn't want to break the silence. I kept looking at Gareth and I just go, no, just sit in the silence and listen to the organ and these choir. And I mean, it was so profound. And Corban was synesthetic and loved music. And I think if you cultivate those things and just participate in the liturgy, there's a whole different realm that opens up to you. And if so I love that. And I love your courses on musicology. And I love Gareth's desire to bring me to these churches. So I just wanted to kind of inject that into the conversation.
Yeah. Could I elaborate on that a little? Because actually, I think this relates to a really important thing you were mentioning, Tom, and maybe it could give us an opportunity to talk about some of your other ideas around the iconographical as well. As it happens, the music we were listening to, Rob, was the Magnificat in the Evensong, which begins, which is the Gospel of Matthew, my soul doth magnify the Lord. And so this is about reception, isn't it? It's about saying yes to the visitation of the divine presence. Mary is visited by the angel Gabriel and gives an affirmation to the birth of the Logos. So, we can read that spiritually and symbolically as the idea of being receptive to and giving birth to the divine. And this is very much contained in the sense of the birth of an image as well, isn't it? And it's interesting just thinking back to what you were talking about earlier on, Tom, with this demonstration of the rock. And incidentally, I was thinking about the way in which, a lot of theoretical science, in a sense, strangely denies the existence of the rock, in a sense. as well. But in a way, that brings us back to the older conception of physics in some sense, which is of saving the appearances, or the sense that the appearances are a series of collective representations in which we either choose to participate or we don't. But what I wanted to bring this back to was I think what you've sketched for us here, I think importantly, with the example of music, with the example of the imagination, is what that requires as a kind of access to this way of knowing, to this gnosis, or what Corban might call a gnoseology or something like that. Now, I mean, I think we've spoken in previous episodes about a number of different figures who you may be familiar with, I'm sure, but I thought I'd bring this into context a little, because one of my first encounters with Corban was through the British poet and theologian Philip Sherard. And Sherard, with his daughter, translated some of Corban's writing. And as part of the of Temenos, which was which I'm sure you're familiar with, they published many of Corban's essays in English. This was maybe going back to the 1980s, and so made them available to a wider readership. I think one of the first things I read of his was published in the very first issue of Temenos, which is called Towards a Chart of the Imaginal. And in it, in a way, he tells this story that you've told us, which is, he says, official philosophy, the positive sciences has separated knowledge into these, it's bifurcated knowledge into the empirical and the conceptual, and denied anything in between. And he says the very thing that this cannot envisage is that the active imagination in man has its own noetic function. And so this is what you're talking about, isn't it? But then what's interesting, because I want to bring this back to angels as well. What's interesting is that he says a bit, because of this, this has closed off this world. It's almost become forbidden. And this is what Danny was talking about here, of this kind of danger almost. You have to cross this threshold because of the forbiddenness of this knowledge in some sense.
Yeah.
But he says it now seems to us impossible or radically impossible to rediscover actual reality, and he calls this the angelic world. And then he says really beautifully, for a long period I have been searching like a young philosopher for the key to this world as a real world, which is neither the sensible world nor the world of abstract concepts. And again, I think this is coming back to what Danny was saying about having to venture that thought, having to grasp the reality of the imagination. Otherwise, everything is nothing. And this is where, music, the image, art, these are things which I think very powerfully connect all these things. And if you'll allow me, I just want to read a brief quotation, which I think really encapsulates all of this really, really beautifully. And this is actually from Sherard. He says, and he wrote this really wonderful book called The Sacred in Life and Art. He says, we have to realize that everything about us is the work of intelligences and angels, enshrines the presence of intelligences and angels, and that there is a bond of kinship uniting our understanding and imagination to them so deep that it can be expressed only in the terms of the deepest experience of our life. We can and we must go to the fount of things, can and must make all things new. A work that only imagination can perform, and performs rightly conceived with the assistance of art. So, I think this is coming back to a lot of the things you said. But one question I wanted to ask was where, you know, I've been to an Orthodox liturgy, and you step into that world, and you're within the celestial structure of the heavens. You know, the iconography, the iconostasis, the separation of heaven and earth. All of these things are presences which are so powerful. And in a sense, that sense of the iconographical nature of reality is very strongly preserved in that tradition, for example. But what you've spoken of in terms of this, let's say, Western conception of the, let's make a correction there, because I think that's to denigrate the Western tradition wrongly. An aspect of the Western tradition which has, created this kind of separation, as it were, along the lines of the positive sciences, and so denied the appearances, and so denied the iconographical nature of reality, and really instantiated a kind of iconoclasm. So I wanted to ask you about this because I'm intrigued by your interest in this field, obviously with Corban as well, and really, yes, to say something about this, about the presence or importance of the iconographical.
If anyone who's embedded in a tradition which has maintained the the power of the iconographic tradition in a church, in a cathedral, I mean, all power to them. That's fantastic. And I spent a long time during my studies of Corban trying to, because I was not raised in such a tradition. I was raised uh, by people who had no religious feeling whatsoever. My father was just kind of blank. A very interesting fellow, actually, perfectly happy, but no religious feelings whatsoever. And my mother was very dark and thought, so nothing religious in my background. And just as a preface here for my interest in this kind of tradition, I had to do a lot of reading to figure out what Christianity was about. And there were two figures. One, Ivan Illich, the Catholic priest and social critic and historian. He was absolutely central to me in my reading and my trying to come to understand any kind of Christianity at all, and provided for me all throughout the books and all through those decades as a counterpoint to Corban, because Corban is a docetist. That is, he thinks that the doctrine of the incarnation was the worst thing that ever happened to Christianity, because it encouraged literalizing, the incarnation as God in the flesh. Corban thought encouraged a literal vision of reality. And Illich is just the absolute opposite. He's an incarnational Catholic priest, and funny. They shared enormous amount together. So the other thing that was crucially important for me, and I mention it because it gets me close to the power of the iconographic tradition. There's a book called On Liturgical Theology by a priest named Aidan Kavanaugh. And it's just a little book, but it's called On Liturgical Theology. And that was my first encounter with someone who lived liturgy in a Corbinian sense. That is, this is real. It's not just a cracker and some wine. Um, but so he was deliteralizing it. Whatever was going on there was in what Corban would call the mundus imaginalis. And reading that book just totally transformed my sense of the possibilities of Christianity. So then I was in. Then I could, because before I was, Christianity, it's just a bunch of patriarchal jackasses who believe in nothing. And it's just, it's been terrible for 2,500 years. I mean, what is that about? And it was through Illich and Kavanaugh that I thought, oh, that's where Corban's coming from. He's sort of starting there. And then Corban and Illich both critique that kind of tradition from the point of view of how easily institutionalization goes off wrong and turns into literalism. And we all know that story. So my profound love of the world that Corban opens up is because of the fact that he argues that in a sense all the world is an icon, and that begins for Corban. I mean, it effectively begins with the Zoroastrians, and then he carries it through the monotheisms and into the present day, and wants to pluralize it. Um, I'm speaking extremely generally here, and then I'll try to get to what I think is the one of the ways to get at the nub of your question. So in Corban, there's this profound sense of the presence of the transcendent in the immanent, and that if you can make yourself capable of God, then these experiences can happen to you, right? And that you're involved in your own transformation in a way which is interpersonal between you and the anima mundi, if you want to say it that way. If you want to emphasize its distributed nature, or if you're in need of some orientation, then you think of that in terms of your angel. But the point is that all of creation was imagined into existence by God, and it's our fault that we don't. Well, that's a little overstated, but it's not God's fault that we don't see things that way. We all right. I mean, this is so. So we see cups as cups because we need to drink out of them. And if you saw it as an angel, you'd have to, oh, heaven's sakes, you'd have to ask it if it was okay, if you put some hot water in it. You'd never get anything done. So you have to literalize and you have to depersonalize. Otherwise, shit, you'll never get done with breakfast. But what happens is you start to realize over the course of millennia that, things go a lot faster if you just pretend everything's a dead object. You just go out and kill a gazelle, be done with it. You don't have to have rituals or any of that shit. And you get sort of habituated into that, and pretty soon the whole world's dead, and you can do whatever you want with it, and you realize, oh shit, it's kind of meaningless. So at the end, that's us. That's us being exploitative and objectifying, and when after a couple thousand years of that, you're gone too. There's nobody inside because there's nobody outside, because the whole thing was set up to be relational. It's relationships all the way down, but really, how hard relationships are. Christ, you can't even get through dinner, and. Yeah, and it would be so much easier if you had a chatbot sitting across from you. It'd be a lot easier. But then there's no humanity there, and so in a culture that's so used to depersonalization and objectivity, and then the isolated subject on the inside. If you just come at most people, I mean, I'm not speaking to the Orthodox Christians or the really great Catholics or even a scattering of Protestants. They're still okay, but I'm not talking to those people. I'm talking to the people who are not particularly religious at all, but would kind of maybe like to be, because it seems like people, it could be an okay thing. If you just say, oh, well, angels, I mean, that's a heavy lift. I mean, that's what I had the first time I read Corban. I was like, angels? Come on, man. I kind of think, well, I said this in class, so Danny knows what's going on, but I kind of think you have to start with worms or nails or a piece of wood or a flower, you know? And so you got to build your anima mundi really gently and slowly. And because of where, I think this is true, because of where I came from, because I was so secularized when I entered Hillman and Corban's world, there's still a lot of that guy in me. And that guy doesn't really care very much about angels because, I mean, geez, that's a heavy lift is to meet my angel. But I love this rock. And I'm not just being silly here. I mean, if you know any geology, as Gareth said, the rock as a thing kind of disappears into, oh my God, the history of geology and crystallography and the beauties and the history and the embeddedness of this rock in the eons of earth. You know, the rock just disappears into what we lamely call the imagination, and that's us following, you know, some little fragment of love that in me, I fall in love with things. I fell in love with a beetle once. I fell in love with crystals once. I fell in love with a woman once. That's the hard one, you know. I mean, I'm really good with rocks and bugs, but not so good with people because it's really hard. But it's that kind of feeling that you know, that I think in one way or another, it's those feelings that you're, if you're able to listen to your angel says, remember this, when you fell in love, you heard that sound, oh, that's right, that's why, that's where I wanted to be. And the beetle and the rock and the flower and physics. I mean, I fell in love with physics, you know, and your angel's trying to tell you all of those things are trying to get you to the same kind of place. And if you get there, you'll say, oh, yes, this is where I wanted to be. And so for me, this iconography business has to be Blake's minute particulars, you know, you have to pay attention. Because if you're me, you love abstract ideas because you can think them in your head, no relationships. I mean, I love that stuff. I'm a white guy. I'm an intellectual. You know, if you get in trouble, you make a generalization. You say, well, all women are like that. I don't, and then you're safe. You know, it's like, yeah, I understand. I understand what she means, and you know, and that's all. It's all bullshit. So, but it's so that was going somewhere super important. Oh, right. It was going to core, but you know, abstraction. I love abstraction. I love physics. I love that. I mean, and there's a lot to be said there. But at a certain point, the abstraction becomes, and this is a quote from Corban, Aristotle's abstract categories are only the
Yeah.
dead bodies of angels. I mean, man, you know, and what he's trying to remind you is that there was some vision of something that struck your heart when you had this flash of insight that then led to an abstract idea which you then used as if it were an abstract idea, and you abstracted it from the person who showed you why it was so beautiful in the first place. So there's always that. And I think, and then I will stop, I think that whether it's abstraction in physics or your rock or a flower or an insect or yerba mate, which, here, this is a good example. I've been drinking yerba mate now for over a year, and I hate this shit. Um, and the actually it's not true anymore. But I'm going to use this as an actual example. I don't know why I started drinking yerba mate. It's from South America, and when I first started drinking it, I really hated it. And I have a long running relationship now with yerba mate. And this is actually a super good example. I really like this stuff now. And it took a long, long time to, this isn't so bad. And I honest, yeah, I hadn't realized because I had a dream about yerba mate and I thought there's something really important here. There's something really important. And I think it's staying with something that is mysterious and difficult. I mean, in one sense, this is an absurd example, but it's also safe. You don't have to go fall in love and get married and do all that other stuff. You just drink something that's difficult to learn to love. Yeah, there you go. That's what I want to say. Many things are difficult to learn to love. And then you spend enough time with them and you think, oh my God, this is a whole universe. It's a whole universe, this thing, right?
No. So I have so many thoughts. First off, I want to see if, as a group, we might say that there's a certain way in which all the threads of this particular conversation are doing what Gareth was talking about, this saving of the appearances. Because Gareth and I have had this conversation about the difference between iconographic art, that we might have seen in, the 11th, 12th, 13th century, and then the supposed advancement to more realistic painting,
Yeah.
which I think is
Yeah.
not what the Renaissance is doing. They're actually trying to mythologize still, but just with more closely resembling. But now we have this kind of movement in art that's hyper real all of the time, and I think this reflects the value of this secular objective truth, right? Where yes, of course, it's a skill to be able to observe in such a way that you can reproduce that perfect, almost photographic image. But then it also invites you to see, as you were talking about with Corban's critique of the incarnation, right, where you think it's literally that person or literally the God, whereas the iconographic reminds us of the value of the imperfect, the value of the fact that it doesn't look exactly like X, Y, or Z person. And so therefore I can see Mary, the spirit of Mary, or I can see the spirit of Zeus in the eagle. And so that here it is this kind of, it's inspiring because it's showing that, yes, the angelic is not God. It is the one that's leading you to that relationship, to a memory, as Plato would say, of our connection. And so that there's, again, this kind of weird paradox, right, of how the imaginal is opened up, as you would say, I think you said it several times yesterday, of destroying this self, right, that you're holding on to because you think it's the real and the true and the just, and if I don't hold on to this self, right, then I'm going to lose a grip on reality, right? And it's like, oh, but no, that's exactly what we need to do, is to lose a grip on reality in order to save the appearance. And it doesn't mean that the hyper-realistic painting or objective truth and knowledge are bad. No, they have a tendency, just like any imaginal project, to lead us astray, but like you do with the rock, or like I did with leaves when I was a little girl, is that you have to, reinvigorate them with the spirit of the more than, right? Like the hyper realistic painting and all the charts about reason and knowledge and facts, right? Like, no, they can. Physics can still be weird. Math can still be inviting us into all the various different things that music, I think, is also doing for us. Like when you talk about the value of music and the value of difficult love, I cannot help but think of the Platonic tradition, Pythagoreanism. I cannot help but think of the fact that Socrates loved Xanthippe, and she was a difficult woman, and that inspired him. And finally,
Yeah.
right, that Socrates loved to dance, right? That he was known, like this was apparently something about him, so that he's listening to this music and being a little bit crazy and having a good time, because that's what happens when we save the appearances, is we're able to celebrate in all the manifest kind of ways that we can celebrate. And so, yeah, anyways, that was a very long-winded way of wanting to get you to just talk more about this kind of celebratory, inspired way that the imperfect, right, that the angelic is not God, right? The angelic is what's leading us to God and putting us back in a restorative, receptive relationship to our need of the other, our need for Goge to be led and inspired, and so that we can remember our relationships with everything.
That's that. Yeah, the my little difficult love soliloquy there. That's a new way of putting it for me. Um, and okay, let me frame it this way. For all these years reading Corban, there's always, particularly at the beginning, but even now, um, I've been ambivalent about him, and in my reading of him, it feels as if he's trying to drag me off to heaven, and whether other people experience reading him that way or not, it's the way he felt to me. And I've always wanted to bring him back down into this fleshy world. And I don't, and I think there's ample opportunity in his texts to see it exactly that way. And this is, I'm kind of walking around because I'm not sure how I want to phrase this, but there's one thing which people who are interested in Corban should know is that there's a lot of Zoroastrianism in him, and one of the ways that displays is he's very clear that there's nothing bad about being a material being. And in the long history of Christianity, there are parts of the Christian tradition which sort of don't, it's, materiality and sex and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, you don't want to do that. That's where evil comes up. I had a young student once. I was teaching in a fairly conservative part of the country, and I was teaching ecology, and we were out on the lawn in the sun in the spring, and I don't know, one of the young women, because it was a women's college, she said, yeah, I don't know, at home they told me not to sit down and put my palms face down on the grass because the demons come up and get you if you do that. That was a thing. That was a real thing. And I thought, ooh, this could be a little hard to teach spiritual ecology to this woman. Corban has none of that. And and here comes, this is relevant to the iconography business. In Corban's reading of the Zoroastrians, it's not the material creation that's fallen. It's this overlay of Ahrimanian darkness and evil, and that in a purified world, or let's do it the other way, in a world where you have awakened, every being is a being of light and beauty. And it's not that material things are fallen because they're material. And then there's a whole doctrine of subtle bodies, which, and if you think of this in the context of the iconography, literalism, representationalism, and all that, this amplifies those discussions. What happens as you move upward, and it is hierarchical, there's other ways to do that, I think, but it's hierarchical for Corban and Ibn Arabi. As you move up in the spiritual hierarchy and raise material beings out of their darkness towards the light, the way we talk about it is we say they become subtle, But there's another way to talk about it, which is they become more and more intensely themselves. So that, like, the Corban loves Swedenborg. And in Swedenborg's heavens, where there's angels, is like every damn rock is like, yow! It's like, oh my God, look at that rock. It's so incredibly intense. And oh my God, this geranium. Everything is just more and more and more itself. And to call those subtle bodies, which is what people do, I think sort of misses the point that Corban and Swedenborg and God himself was trying to set up. No, come up here. This is better. It's not subtilized, and it's not that you get away from dirty things like sex. It becomes really good sex. In Swedenborg's world, the angels, they have sex because, Jesus, I mean, of course they do. For heaven's sakes, it's heaven. What the hell? So, and Corbin's argument is that we get the whole thing kind of backwards here. You're supposed to become subtilized and spiritual and leave all this messy female shit alone. No, wrong. No, not right. And you can, if you're very careful, you can follow those threads through Corbin, though of course he's constrained by writing in French and English, but I swear, and I'm going to throw this right at Danny, that what I got from Ed Krantz those years ago, and he told me, well, of course, you should learn as many languages as you can, and I never did it. And in some future life, I will come back and do that, because I'm just feeling so constrained by English and French. My young friend Simon Cox, I asked him the other day about his languages, and he knows Mandarin and Tibetan and Greek and some other radically, Japanese or something. And he was, oh yeah, oh yeah, it's really, really, really different. And I think that one of the things to understand about Corbin, and I'm speaking as a monolinguist, is that he's often, should I use an Arabic word or a Greek word, or should I use a Russian word? And none of these are quite right, but let's go with emphamesis for the thought of the heart. And I think at Corbin's level of spiritual sensitivity and sophistication, he's got all these really different options for organizing. And here's where I really want to come down hard: organizing the sensibilities that he's manifesting. And I think English is just deadly. Everything's a noun. And in other languages, things are verbs. And that's why, and I'm so monolingual, that's why I think I'm so attracted to music. I was in the last few weeks, I've been thinking, well, maybe I should learn Mandarin. And I'm 73 years old, and it ain't going to happen. It just isn't. But Simon said, yeah, learning Chinese was the most profound thing I've ever done in my life, because of these kinds of reasons. And so I'm trying to bring home the point that I understand this, that I feel it maybe kind of a lot, that people don't realize how trapped they are in their own languages. And that being trapped in your language means you're trapped in a certain style of experience, and that it's breaking through those habitual experiences and the immediate. There is no difference between cognizing and experiencing. They're just like this. And if you shift one just a little, the other shifts. So one thing you can do as a monolinguist is read poetry, and that helps.
So one of the things I want to pick up on here, we're gonna have to eventually start wrapping up, but I don't want to end this conversation, so you're gonna have to come back. So, the mono. So this is one of the reasons why the Greeks practiced a kind of divine activity. We tend to think of etymology as getting to the origins of words, versus for the Greek right? You did etymology, and you did it in a variety of different ways so that you could break your language apart, right? That you could see how it was, as I keep saying this week, polyphonic, right? That there are a multiplicity of meanings, and we can even understand it so transformatively, right? So this is why the Cratylus is not a joke of a text, right? It is one of the most important texts because it reminds us that, yeah, I can do an etymology of anthropos and somehow mysteriously get it to mean for those who look up, right? Those who can see the angelic hierarchies, kind of inviting us to this otherwise. Because again, language too is iconographic, right? Like it is falls short of the original, so to speak. But in that, it becomes a kind of messenger or kind of beautiful, like infinite thing, because then we have to talk to each other forever, and that's really difficult, right? And so that when you use the word mercurial, that is etymologically connected to Mercury, but also connected to Hermes and connected to this kind of first original angelic type of being, and so. At the end of the day, I just want you to know that everything that you have said is absolutely inspiring, and it reminds us that even when we live in a secularized world where everything is about efficiency and practicality, and as your mother apparently would have said, that everything lacks meaning, that we can actually take that nihilism and that mono-linguistic, all the world's just a dog eat dog world, and like that's the song that I think Americans sing, right? Is that just tough it out until you die, basically. And it's like, well, no, you can see how in this imperfect way of life, there's an invitation. There's still an angel present that allows us to recreate the world through the imagination, to recreate the world with love, so that I can go out on my porch in 10 minutes when we're done and talk to those leaves again. And they'll welcome me back with open arms, like, yay, Danny's returned. Just like your rocks and just like the poetry can speak again. Because we've all experienced this, right? Where we have those moments with poetry or art, and we're like, this is just what we do when we're bored, right? This is the kind of, and it's like, yeah, no, you can go back to poetry, even if you say you hate it, and try again, right? And see, if this particular, so for instance, I couldn't get into poetry via Shakespeare when I was younger, but it was women like Sexton and Sylvia Plath. Like, we needed to find the teacher or the guide that spoke to you. And so I guess that's my long-winded way of saying thank you for being that teacher and guide to people, because I do believe you're speaking from the heart, right? And becoming more intensely yourself. And so thank you.
Tom's one of the most erotic people I know, by the way. His angels speak through Tom. One of the first times I met him, and a lot in his classes, he goes, I might be picturing the rock right now in my head. I might be touching it. And that's the axis imaginalis. That's where Sophia connects heaven and earth. And it's so people like Tom and Corban and Hillman, they're kairotic in the sense that they enact what they're imagining and what they believe, and it lets you imagine it easier. They become exemplars the same way for some people the Buddha or Christ or Sophia.
Come on.
No. Well, maybe you're a little lower on the angelic hierarchy. But still, compared to those people that you were talking about earlier who are trapped in their material secular prisons, almost the opposite of the Gnostic prisons that the Greeks had in their world, where they alienated from their body, both are very bad. And people like Corban and Tom, and I think Danny and Gareth are all these portals and gateways into this kind of lifelong exploration of proper Sophianic philosophy.
Yeah, it's but because we want to show the connection, and that connection is real, like that or it can be, the real is imagining that connection, right? And so
Can I insert one small thing here for our audience who I don't know at all? One of the things that I think really sticks with me after all these years with this stuff is that I didn't know. I intuited, but I wasn't taught it, and it wasn't emphasized. Sometimes the very most important things are incredibly small and subtle. I mean, for me and my personality style and my culture, things have to be loud and big and surprising and wonderful. And I love that stuff. But sometimes somebody really important is trying to get your attention and they're just whispering really quietly and it only lasts a fraction of a second. And that was it. That was the most important thing in your life. And nobody teaches people that. So people should pay attention. Yeah.
Well, hopefully I've chosen something apt to conclude with, because this brings us back both to, I think, the thing you said earlier on about the cup, and this idea of the fragment of love, and also your rock, because I think, we've been talking really here about the sacred and the profane in many respects. And in a way, we can be sacramentalists, we can consecrate things. And even if it's the cup or the rock, these are the things we can use on that hierarchy of being to bring us in towards higher things. But this is an extract from a poem from Philip Sherard, so one of Corban's translators. And it's about this very thing, actually, Tom. It's about grasping that small thing. Not there, not elsewhen, but now, but here, but this stone, this shell, this flower, this tree, this sea, each in possession of its own indestructible beauty and being, in the deathless alleluia of the windfall world. And if it's not in this instant of their eternal burgeoning, without, before, or after, that we behold in all things the Lord of life incessantly reborn, then nowhere and never will we. For though the miracle is always present, it will never be alive and truly real for us unless in what we see the sacred message, God's unchanging eye, gazing from his myriad changing masks into our own now hallowed eyes.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you, guys, for this inspiring conversation. Tom, I really do look forward to having you back on Platonic Mysticism. And thank you, Gareth, for always having something like that at your fingertips, a small thing. And Rob, you're the man, the goat. Okay. All right. I'll see you guys next time.
Oh dear.